You have two choices. Option A guarantees saving 200 lives. Option B offers a 33% chance of saving all 600 lives and a 66% chance of saving no one. Which do you choose? Lock in your answer. Now, consider this. Option C means for 100 people will die. Option D offers a 33% chance that no one dies and a 66% chance that all 600 people die. Which do you choose now? If you're like most people, you likely chose A in the first scenario and D in the second. But here's the catch. Option A and C are identical. Saving 200 out of 600 means for 100 die. Option B and D are also identical. So why do we switch our decision when the information hasn't changed at all? You've just experienced one of the most powerful and pervasive glitches in the human mind, the framing effect. It's shaping your investments, your health, your political views. It operates like an invisible architect, quietly designing your choices without you ever realizing it. And what if I told you that you've already made at least 3 bad decisions today? Not because of bad information, but because of 2 specific words. Today, we're exposing this invisible architect. We'll understand why our brains are so susceptible to linguistic manipulation, and most importantly, how to take back control. Welcome to Psych Blueprint. To understand the framing effect, we need to confront an uncomfortable truth about ourselves. We like to believe we are rational beings, that we analyze data and choose the optimal path. But decades of cognitive psychology research have proven otherwise. We are not perfect information processors. We are creatures of emotion, instinct, and most crucially, context. Imagine your mind as a camera. Objective reality is the landscape in front of you. But you never see the whole landscape. You see it through a lens, and that lens has a frame. If I give you a telephoto lens, you'll zoom in on a tiny detail and ignore everything around it. If I give you a wide-angle lens, you'll see the broader context but lose the detail. The landscape hasn't changed, but what you see and how you feel about it changes completely. This is the framing effect. It's a cognitive bias where people decide on options based on whether the options are presented with positive or negative connotations. We call this the perception prism. It bends reality. Consider a simple example. Would you buy ground beef that is 90% lean or 10% fat? Most people prefer 90% lean. It sounds healthier, but they are the exact same product. 90% lean is a gain frame. It emphasizes what you get. 10% fat is a loss frame. It emphasizes what you want to avoid. Our brains are wired to react differently to these 2 types of frames, and that difference isn't trivial. Why does this happen? And more importantly, there's one area of your life where this framing effect is costing you the most money. And it's not where you think. To understand that, we need to dive into the mechanics of the mind. The story begins in the late 1970s with 2 brilliant psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They revolutionized our understanding of decision-making with their groundbreaking work. Prospect theory. This theory discovered something fundamental about human nature. We hate losing more than we love winning. This phenomenon is called loss aversion. The pain of losing $100 is significantly greater than the joy of finding $100. We are evolutionarily wired to protect what we have. And here's the critical link. The framing effect directly exploits this loss aversion. Let's return to the disease example we started with. This is the classic Asian disease problem, when the scenario was framed in terms of gains saving lives. A. Save 200 people for sure. B. 33% chance to save 600.72% chose A. They opted for certainty. When things look good, we become risk-averse. We don't want to gamble away the sure gain. But when the scenario was framed in terms of losses, people dying, C. 400 people die for sure. D. 66% chance 600 people die. 78% chose D. They opted for the gamble. Why? Because when faced with a sure loss, we become risk-seeking. We are willing to roll the dice in the hopes of avoiding the loss altogether. It reveals that our decisions are not based on objective reality. but on our emotional reaction to how that reality is framed. So, what's happening in our brains? When information is presented in a loss frame, it tends to activate our amygdala, the brain's fear processing center. Our response becomes more instinctual. We enter a fight or flight mode. The fear of loss overwhelms rational analysis. Conversely, when information is presented in a gain frame, it tends to engage the prefrontal cortex, more the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking. We feel safer and tend to be more conservative. But the framing effect isn't just limited to gains and losses. There are different types of frames. Attribute framing, the 90% lean beef example. Goal framing, focusing on the benefits of acting, all the costs of not acting. For example, if you don't get a checkup, you increase your risk of dying early. Loss is often stronger than if you get a checkup. You increase your chances of living a healthy life. Gain for detection behaviors. Subtle linguistic framing, this is where things get insidious. Consider the difference between a used car and a certified pre-owned vehicle. Words don't just describe reality, they create reality. You might be thinking, so, is everything manipulation? Not exactly. The framing effect itself is neither good nor bad. It's a feature of human psychology. It can be used ethically, for example, public health campaigns, using loss frames to encourage healthy behaviors. Manipulation occurs when framing deliberately obscures crucial information or exploits our fears for someone else's gain. Am I always affected? The impact depends on cognitive load. When you are tired, stressed, or rushed, you are more susceptible. Personal relevance. If the issue isn't important to you, you're more likely to be swayed. Expertise. Experts in a specific area are often less affected in that domain, but no one is immune. The framing effect has profound real-world consequences. 1. Finance and investment. This is the area where the framing effect can cost you the most money. Individual investors often make the classic mistake of selling winning stocks too early and holding on to losing stocks too long. This behavior is a primary reason many individual investors underperform. 2. Medicine and healthcare. How doctors present treatment options significantly impacts patient decisions. 90% success rate versus 10% failure rate. We are talking about life and death decisions being influenced by word choice. 3. Politics and public policy. Politics is the art of framing. A tax proposal can be called a tax relief for the wealthy, or an economic stimulus for job creators. Same policy, vastly different public reaction. The reality is, we live in a framed world. If we don't learn to recognize these frames, we will forever be puppets in someone else's play. The good news is, we are not powerless. Psychologists have developed a 3-step technique to instantly break free from any cognitive frame. And right now, I'm going to share it with you. How do we protect ourselves? The solution is to develop empowered awareness. It's learning to see the frame and then consciously choosing whether to accept it. Here's the 3-step technique to neutralize the framing effect, which we call the cognitive reframing protocol. Remember the acronym REF. Step 1. Recognize the frame. First step is to realize that you are in a frame. Develop a sensitive mental filter for language. Red flags include highly emotional language. If the information makes you scared or excited, you are in a frame. Emphasis on gains or losses. If it's heavily skewed to one side, benefits or risks, you are being framed. Omitted information. Ask yourself, what are they not telling me? Example, investment fund ad says, average annual return of 15%. Gain frame. Recognize, this frame omits risk and volatility. Step 2, evaluate the context. Next step is to evaluate the motives behind the frame. Become a psychological detective. Who is framing this information? What is their motive? What do they gain if you accept their frame? Evaluate. The investment company wants you to invest. Their motive is profit. They have a clear bias. Step 3. Formulate an alternative. Prometheus is the most powerful step. This is where you take back control. Actively generate alternative frames. Flip the frame if it's a gain frame. Rephrase it as a loss frame and vice versa. 90% lean, 10% fat. This helps neutralize your emotional reaction. Seek different reference points. 20% off compared to what? Was the original price fair? Apply the outsider test. Imagine you are giving advice to a friend in the same situation. Formulate 15% compared to the general market index. What level of risk is involved? What are the management fees? Recognize, evaluate, formulate. That's your protocol for dismantling the perception prison. It requires effort, but the payoff is mental autonomy. Practice this today. Do the reframe check before any significant decision. We've discovered that our belief in absolute rationality is an illusion. We've seen how our minds are susceptible to the way information is framed. But we don't end this story with a sense of despair. We end with empowered awareness. You can never eliminate the framing effect entirely, but you can learn to see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. By practicing the REF protocol, you not only protect yourself from manipulation, but you also develop a deeper understanding of reality. Ultimately, mastering the framing effect is about living a more authentic life. It's about ensuring that your choices are your own, not the product of language carefully crafted by someone else. The world will continue to try to impose its frame on you, but now you have the tools to create your own. You are no longer a passive viewer. You are the photographer. You choose the lens. You choose the focus. If this video has changed the way you think about decision making, share it. And if you want to continue this journey of mastering your mind, hit the subscribe button and join the Psych Blueprint community. Thank you for watching. I'm Psych, and this is Psych Blueprint. Keep learning, keep growing, and always question the frame.